Oh, I feel fabulous.
This is what it's like to qualify for a modern saint's calendar, the end product of a process you can buy in about 25 scattered centres for £1,000 a head.
Everybody's just wonderful. Well done. It's just fabulous to be.
It's like nothing else in the world. It's really, I feel quite free and even at ease under these circumstances.
Yeah?
Yes, marvelous.
This is what it's like to graduate from this new kind of seminary with a degree in perfect freedom and truth. There are few dropouts, though the course may have taken anything up to 17 years.
The Hubbard College of Scientology, Qualifications Division, Department of Certifications and Awards, does hereby certify that Anthony A. Phillips has attained the state of clear.
Well, thank you very much. There is an enormous amount I could say at this point. I've been in Scientology 13 years. I've been quite closely connected with, or not closely connected, but I've seen all the research that's gone on, or a lot of it, and I've been the effect of some of it. There's so much to it that, you know, it's all I have to say, you know, it's inexpressible.
That's it. Clear 386 Lee Echo. That's it. Clear 371 Josephine Barth. That's it. Clear 370 Janet Lund.
These people getting diplomas are clear. They believe that for most of their lives, their true selves have been buried under a mountain of bad experiences and troubling emotions, and that at last this mountain has been shoveled away. They have found themselves. The slate has been wiped clean, and they can see clearly for the first time.
The Hubbard College of Scientology, Qualifications Division, Department of Certifications and Awards, does hereby certify that Janet E. Lundy has attained the state of clear.
Their sacrifice in time and money, their uncritical dedication to one man, seem unimportant by comparison.
Thank you. My goodness, I've never given a speech before, so this is the first one for me. But I did want to say one thing. Validate yourselves. You're beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, it's a fantastic feeling. I suppose the most incredible feeling of all was just a great vista opening up in front of me and realizing, my God, you know, there's fantastic space for achievement. And I can now expand into that space and just open up and achieve. And this was the most incredible feeling of, wow, there's a great big new horizon.
Scientologists are all convinced of this great big new horizon. Those who haven't graduated can see it ahead. Their proof is a kind of science. Getting on with each other, getting through to each other, in other words, communication, is very much a modern problem. And communication is something that Scientologists practice remorselessly.
Thank you.
You are by far the worst doctor I've ever seen. Today, has there been a protest? Thank you. Here we have the strands.
To them, a breakdown in communication means a niggling little neurosis blocking channels, and from this, most human ills arise.
Here is an overt pull by the PC where he told a lie to his wife. In the auditing section, I haven't demonstrated it here because I rather want to keep this simple, this demonstration, is an overt later in time when, because he stayed in bed.
Practice makes perfect, with plasticine, pictures, or any other handy educational aid. Man is not perfect until he has made himself perfect, may be the first article of faith, but proper communication is the first commandment. The central mystery in Scientology is this machine, the E-meter, recently condemned at a public trial in Washington as totally unscientific.
This is an E-meter, and all it is doing is to measure the electrical resistance of your body, that is between that can and that can, you see. Now in Scientology we know that that resistance is affected by your mental activities, all right? So if I was
Why should that be?
Pardon?
Why should that be?
Well, we're getting a bit involved there, but it's thought it does have some mass to it, and therefore it does affect the resistance of the body. Or it may bring about a chemical change in the body, so what?
Is it only thoughts that it will react to, but if I get emotions, if I'm angry with you or something, will it then react?
Well, emotions are also the same as thought. They affect your thoughts, they affect your thinking, don't they? So they would react, emotions would react on you, yes, quite definitely.
And Reg, when you go clear, what happens on the meter?
Well, that needle on there is, we'll just magnify the read a bit. It's a bit sticky and tight, you see. Nothing derogatory about you on this. And this would come down, this pointer would be down here to balance it off, do you see? And the needle would float, and I don't think I can, something like that I'm doing now, but that's even too jerky. It's a beautiful sight to see, particularly for Scientologists, I know, but even to anybody outside, this needle just smoothly floating away there. And it wouldn't be affected by anything.
I shall ask you for an ARC break, then I shall date it, and then I shall run a list on you, asking you about any questions that read, okay? In the ARC break you recalled, had a withhold been missed? Thank you. Had some emotion been rejected? Thank you. Had some affinity been rejected?
With people, such machines record something, but no one quite knows what. There's a story about a man who was asked whether he was Napoleon. When he said no, just such a machine recorded he was lying. In Scientology, it's a ridiculously short step from such lies to a seemingly scientific theory of past lives, in one of which a Scientologist might have been Napoleon. Faith is blind, and though Scientologists seem in some ways to be scientists in an internal laboratory, their experimental animal, their own personality, they are really just blind worshippers at the shrine of science.
I completely missed what you're trying to get with this answer. Would you repeat it?
So now that they're sort of in rapport, communication is possible. If people only knew this, men and women wouldn't have so many troubles. Husbands wouldn't fight with their wives. Wife wouldn't get mad at the husband at the breakfast table because she can't talk through the newspaper. She just get his attention first. It would simplify things. So once you get attention, you can put a communication across.
My mother. It was fantastic. I could not get along with her.
He can reply to it, answer the question, or execute the action that's requested.
I love women. I'm single, but I've been engaged a few times. Unhappily, every time you lift the skirts, there are the clay feet.
And he then acknowledges and says something like, "Thank you, you did it. You know, good."
There have been several tremendous emotional crises in my life. One tends to look back now, of course, and see them as being rather ordinary, rather run-of-the-mill things. At the time, they were immensely important to me. They were terribly contracting at the time. You know, there were certain crises, particularly in relations with the opposite sex, which completely stopped me from acting. You know, and eventually one had to somehow break this thing down. Whatever this crisis was, one had to break these barriers down and step outside of it and somehow start anew at some particular point. I must say, looking back now, mind you, that I would not have missed these for anything in the world, these crises. And this is not that I would wish to have caused pain and suffering to anyone, but I would not have missed the experience of these things because it was these particular moments of stress which sent me on the path for truth in my terms, truth and freedom.
The churches are too presumptuous for my liking. They all claim to have the one answer, and that cannot be so. The politicians are even worse. The world's getting into a terrible mess, and I can't see it getting out of it. And we all have to have this to survive. The only real beauty in life I've discovered is truth, and that's what I've been trying to find.
Personal crisis, the inadequacies of the church. There are many roads to truth and to Scientology, but most of them lead to England.
Hello.
I'm Jim Mondier from L.A.
Oh, hi, Jim.
Hi. It's cold here.
Yeah, it really
Those
is.
who take the path to total freedom take a path that eventually leads them to St. Hill Manor in Sussex. It's a pilgrimage that involves a good deal of expense and hard work.
In the beginning, I'm going to take some review work of some of the grades I've been through.
Yeah.
And then process up to level 5, and then go back and do the Dynetics course.
Americans abound. Scientology is a Californian export, and though it spawned a number of centers that still thrive in the States, the headquarters in Sussex sometimes seems a little America.
Yeah, I guess so.
Quite warm in Los Angeles when I left yesterday, 102 degrees, and about 40 when I arrived here today.
Oh, you're from LA?
Yeah.
There are a lot of people from LA in New York right now. You probably know a few of them.
In some ways, their trip to England reminds one of the LSD trips young Californians are currently going on. For the young, a cut-price cloud cuckoo land inside where anything seems possible. For the older or more hidebound, a mixture of science fiction and psychotherapy that gives their search for something better the blessing of a kind of science, but a science uncritical of itself.
You can fill out your address back home and what made you decide to come to St. Hill at this particular time, and names and addresses of any people you have.
St. Hill Manor in Sussex is the Scientologists' Mecca, and Lafayette Ron Hubbard, their American founder, is the one true prophet.
Now, we've had other great leaders in the past. Well, let's take Jesus Christ. He wrote nothing, and there weren't tape recorders in that time. So consequently, the Gospels were written by somebody else many years afterwards. And we want to avoid that in Scientology, that we do get the words of the founder and discoverer of these truths.
Everything at St. Hill is touched by Ron Hubbard's personality. All tapes contain his voice, all but a few of the textbooks are his, and all Scientologists regard him with awe.
Sapiens call leadership. How he's getting along, and whether we should continue the process or not, he will tell us no. No. Hitler. Don't. On the Western Front as a corporal. He isn't talking. This young Austrian, that isn't he. That isn't his motivation at all. Had a few too many shells.
I think he's very brave. And he's just a wonderful man. You know, we can have, I know we have 10-year-old children on some of the courses, same course as a 50, 60-year-old man. And each one understands because it's so simple and so beautifully laid out.
He's the one person that I have known to always validate and let anyone I've ever seen him talk with or any group I've ever seen him talk to know that they are important, that what they can do matters. And with a man like this, you don't criticize.
Lafayette Ron Hubbard is 56, a 3 times married American ex-science fiction writer and Hollywood scriptwriter. His one-man religion, Scientology, dates from 1950, when he launched an early version on an American public obsessed with amateur psychologizing. It first appeared in a popular science fiction magazine, but a best-selling book followed, and it caught on. That is, until the first public presentation of a clear proved a fiasco, and the next fad took over. It was condemned by the American Psychological Association and then ignored. The movement hopscotched from California to Kansas to Arizona, and eventually Hubbard decided to move the world headquarters to England. He bought St. Hill Manor in Sussex and founded 2 companies with a prospective share capital of £500,000. The week we filmed, the weekly income graph of St. Hill stood at £23,000. Running costs are hard to reckon up, but in July '66, Hubbard issued a bulletin recommending that they shouldn't go above £5,500. So profits for the week we filmed must have been at least £10,000, equivalent to £500,000 a year. Since all dollar payments go into an external account, and since Hubbard gets 10% from all other organizations, he's an exceedingly rich man. With large investments in Rhodesia and elsewhere, a Swiss bank account and a yacht with which he has been for the last 6 months, he can go anywhere at any time. A goodwill payment of £100,000 was paid to him by the organization, and Scientology now largely operates without him. Few Scientologists know, however, either where Hubbard is or where the money goes. They work for the organization for a pittance or simply pay up. A booklet we received after filming requested advance payment of £942, 8 shillings for courses they would like us to take.
Well, in Scientology, being here, one doesn't want to criticise Scientology. There is no need, because you're here and it's for you, and that's fine.
But what would happen if one day you were dissatisfied? What would happen if you did criticise?
I wouldn't.
Why not?
Because there would not be anything that I would be dissatisfied with.
But one day there might be, mightn't there?
Not for me.
How do you know?
I know.
But how?
It's just a knowingness, the truth.
I'll try once again. Okay.
Any truth. One doesn't feel anything except knowingness and truth.
But Barbara, you might change one day. The things that you think might change. You might change your mind.
Well, change is originated by me. And if it's truth, then I won't want to change. I won't want to deviate from the truth.
What do you think of people who do criticise Scientology?
That's fine. They just haven't discovered Scientology.
What do you think of people who know something about Scientology, who still criticise Scientology?
They don't know Scientology.
What do you think of people who have been Scientologists, who criticise Scientology?
Then they have lost something which only they can find, and once having found it, they will be back.
Criticism is classified somewhere between a misdemeanor and a crime. Public criticism is a high crime, worse than theft, mayhem, or seduction of a minor. The punishment is usually excommunication. This is an order put out by Hubbard's Ethics Office.
Dr. Carl Kemeny is hereby declared a suppressive person for telling a Scientologist that Scientology wouldn't last long, that Scientology is a form of brainwashing and mesmerizes people into believing the philosophy. Not to be communicated with. Declared fair game.
1966, or in the new style, the year of our Lord 16. Hubbard Communications Office, year 16.
Details of how to go about dealing with attackers of Scientology. Here's what you do. Soon as one of these threats starts, you get a Scientologist or Scientologists to investigate noisily. You find out where he or she works or worked, doctor, dentist, friends, neighbors, anyone, and phone them up and say, I am investigating Mr. and Mrs. ... for criminal activities as she has been trying to prevent man's freedom.
Office of L. Ron Hubbard, year 16.
Enquiry Rumour, UK, planning. Get a detective on that Lord's past to unearth the titbits. They're there. Stress sex and blood in psychiatry and collect data and mount an all-out attack in the press on psychiatry.
Well, I sort of became one and then decided that I was one. I was not very happy. I'd have a degree in art history from NYU. I'd graduated and was getting ready to go to Europe for, I was hoping for a year. And I was all of a sudden having boyfriend trouble and getting very, very nervous and upset and didn't know what was wrong. And when I had gotten upset like this, my family doctor had given me tranquilizers. So I went back to him and said, I need more tranquilizers because I'm going to Europe and I'm nervous. And at the same time as all this was happening, my boss called me up one day and said, don't bother coming back to work until you've taken a 2-week vacation and gotten your problems straightened out. I hung up the phone and got ready for a really good cry, and a friend of mine called me and said, what's the matter? And I said, and he said, oh, well, come to Scientology. They can help you with that. And Scientology, poof, I didn't need Scientology. I needed tranquilizers or a psychiatrist, or, I was in trouble. And he was very, very strong about this, get down here and get yourself straightened out. And I didn't have the strength to say, no, I'll do what I want. So I went, and I didn't know what it was. And they said, well, you pay such and such amount of money, and you get this auditing. I said, what's that? And they said, oh, here's a book. And I didn't have the concentration to read a book, so I went back and I said, I'll take it, just whatever it is. So I went in and I got some of this stuff called auditing, which is where you just hold these cans on the meter and talk for a while and answer questions. And before I got the auditing, they said you can't take the tranquilizers. You're not allowed to have any drugs when you're doing this. So the night before, I hadn't taken any drugs. And the next day, I wasn't shaking anymore. And I didn't take any tranquilizers. And I went in, they said, how do you feel? And I was a little unhappy that it was all over in one day. And I said, well, is this all? What is this? And I got furious. And they looked at me and they said, okay. And I got furious because they weren't getting upset. And they said, well, why don't you, take a course and find out what it's about. And I did, started, and the next day I was learning things I'd always wanted to know. And I've been doing it ever since.
Scientology has been the last straw. They've been to doctors, they've been to psychiatrists, they've had electric shock and so on. They hear about it. And I think this is the last straw, and consequently it is the last straw for them and their money. And they come along and they do a psychological test on a piece of paper, and then they're eventually sold a course for many hundreds of pounds, and they take this. And of course, if the person doesn't progress, the evilness of this is so that if they do not progress, it's their fault. They must have more auditing. The case is deeper and thicker than first thought.
I've known many hundreds of them. And I should say the majority are people who, either in their childhood or even right to the moment when they took up Scientology, were people who lacked. They were the have-nots. They lacked education, mostly, most of them. They lacked any background, sort of social background, nothing stable in it. And of course, many, many, many of them lacked health, I suppose, mental health or physical health. So there is a great deal of lack in the people to whom this Scientology does appeal.
Basically, its latest phase of development has been families break up, such as Michael Panetta. His family has been split up. He was ordered to disconnect from his wife.
They did it with my wife. She went down there, and from one moment to another, this little chit of a girl cast her to the outer fringes, to Hades and back, and it was merely on her say-so during a 10-minute interview. In other words, what you might call my work, which I'd been working in Scientology somewhere in the region of about 10 years. In one moment, you could say that the whole thing was upside down, inside out.
I suppose, to use a hackneyed word, they're brainwashed to think it's so right. They cannot think anything else.
No, I think I'd know if I'd been brainwashed.
How would you know?
Well, look at me. Am I brainwashed?
I can't possibly tell you. You could be.
Well, then you don't know. See, I do.
But how do you know?
Well, I know.
Why did you finally leave?
Well, I finally saw the light of day, thank goodness. I finally realized that this is an organization which is creating or endeavoring to make me and other people feel guilty and work for nothing and virtually, supposedly adore Hubbard. And I'm afraid it's not within me to adore anyone, least of all Hubbard. Least of all Hubbard.
As far as I'm concerned, it's of no concern to me whether he makes $1 million a year out of it or not. As far as I'm concerned, he can have it because he's earned it. Because one thing I do know, regardless of what else happens, is the man does work about 20 hours a day at it. I mean, the amount of volume of wordage and tapes and books and everything come out is a fantastic achievement. So if he makes £1 million a day, and if he is making a lot of money, it's of no concern to me. I think that's wonderful.